The neural interface burned like liquid fire behind Commander Vex Kellen's eyes as he severed the final connection. The screaming stopped. The pleas for mercy, the children's cries, the desperate transmissions from colony ships, all of it vanished into blessed, terrible silence. He floated in the command nexus of the dreadnought Soul Reaper, his consciousness finally his own after 18 months of neural slavery. Around him, the bridge crew moved with mechanical precision, their minds still tethered to the Dominion's collective will. Only he had broken free, and the cost had been everything that made him human. Report Kalen. The voice belonged to Admiral Threx, whose face flickered in the holographic display. Even through the distortion, Vex could see the neural implants pulsing beneath the alien's translucent skin. Epsilon Eridani's system pacified, Vex reported, his voice hollow. 17 human colonies eliminated. Population, 0. The truth was different. 3 colonies had escaped. He'd let them, but the Dominion would never know. They'd severed their own connection to avoid the psychic backlash he'd engineered when he broke free. Excellent. Return to Base Omega. You've earned respite. The transmission ended, leaving Vex alone with his crimes. 17 billion souls on his conscience, even if he'd saved 3 times that number. The neural conditioning had forced his hand for most of it, but the guilt remained. He was no longer Vex Kalen, decorated fleet commander. He was a weapon that had briefly remembered. It was once human. The journey to Base Omega took 14 days through hyperspace. 14 days to contemplate what he'd become. The Dominion had perfected the art of psychological warfare. They didn't just conquer species. They turned them into willing servants. The neural interface had made him complicit in humanity's near extinction, feeding him emotions and memories that weren't his own until he couldn't tell where the machine ended, and he began. Base Omega orbited a dying star, its metallic superstructure gleaming like a malevolent jewel. As the Soul Reaper docked, Vex wondered if this would be where his story ended. He'd outlived his usefulness now that the human resistance was scattered to the solar winds. The debriefing chamber was a sterile cube of polished metal, designed to amplify psychic resonance. Admiral Threx materialized as a full hologram, his forearms gesturing dismissively. Your performance exceeded expectations, Kalen. The human resistance has been effectively neutralized. What now? Vex asked, though he already knew. Now you rest. The neural integration process has been ... taxing. You'll be transferred to the rehabilitation facility on Kepler Station. Rehabilitation, a euphemism for psychic lobotomy, erasing whatever humanity remained in his mind. Vex nodded, accepting his fate. Perhaps it was better this way. The guilt was becoming unbearable. The transport ship was a sleek needle of black metal that cut through space like a blade. Vex sat in the passenger bay, his hands shackled with energy bonds that suppressed his neural activity. 3 Dominion guards watched him with unblinking compound eyes, their weapons trained on his chest. They were halfway to Kepler Station when the ship shuddered. Emergency lights bathed everything in crimson as the hull groaned under some immense pressure. Through the viewport, Vex glimpsed something impossible, a massive structure emerging from hyperspace, its hull scarred with battle damage. A human ship, the last free ship in the galaxy, and it was coming for him. The rescue was brutal and efficient. The human ship, the Dreadnought Defiant. Dawn crippled the Dominion transport with a single ion pulse before boarding pods punched through the hull. Vex barely had time to process what was happening before. The energy bonds around his wrists dissolved, and a figure in battle armor knelt beside him. Commander Kalen. The voice was feminine, filtered through a combat helmet. I'm Captain Lirelei Voss. We're here to extract you. Vex stared at her, confused. You should have left me. I'm compromised. I'm a war criminal, she finished. We know. We also know you saved the Tau Ceti colonies, the Kepler settlements, New Geneva. Before he could respond, she hauled him to his feet. Move. We have 30 seconds before Dominion reinforcements arrive. The extraction was a nightmare of plasma fire and decompression alarms. Vex found himself pushed into an escape pod as the Defiant Dawn prepared to jump to hyperspace. Through the pod's tiny viewport, he watched the Dominion transport explode in a ball of superheated gas. The Defiant Dawn was a ghost ship, its corridors filled with the desperate remnants of humanity's military. As they led him through the maze of passages, Vex saw the hollow eyes of soldiers who'd lost everything. They looked at him with a mixture of hope and hatred, hope that he might help them win, hatred for what he'd been forced to do. Captain Voss removed her helmet as they reached the medical bay, revealing a face marked by exhaustion and determination. Her hair was prematurely white, her left eye replaced by a cybernetic implant that glowed softly blue. "The Dominion interface," she said, gesturing to a chair surrounded by medical equipment. "We need to remove it completely. The procedure is unpleasant." Vex nodded, understanding. Without the interface, he'd lose the enhanced cognitive abilities that made him valuable as a military commander. But he'd also lose the last connection to the alien collective that had enslaved him. The procedure took 6 hours. When Vex woke, his head felt empty, hollow. The voices were gone, the whispers of alien thoughts that had haunted him for months. In their place was a ringing silence that felt like freedom. "How do you feel?" Dr. Alara Voss asked. She was the captain's sister, her face softer, but bearing the same determined expression. "Different," Vex admitted, quieter. Over the following days, he learned about the Defiant Dawn and its crew. They were the last organized resistance to the Dominion Bear. 3,000 souls aboard a ship designed for 10,000. They'd been running for 2 years, striking at isolated Dominion outposts and rescuing what humans they could. But something was wrong with the ship. Vex noticed it in the way conversations stopped when he entered a room, in the careful way the crew avoided certain sections of the vessel. There were mysteries aboard the Defiant Dawn, secrets that the Voss sisters kept carefully guarded. It was Captain Voss who finally revealed the truth. "We have someone we'd like you to meet," she said, leading him to a secured section of the ship. "Someone who might understand what you've been through." The chamber was unlike anything else on the ship, its walls covered in acoustic dampening material, the air itself seeming to absorb sound. At its center sat a young woman, her eyes closed in meditation. "This is Nixara," Captain Voss said softly. "She was captured by the Dominion 3 years ago. They tried to turn her into a neural relay, a living communications hub for their collective consciousness." Vex stared at the woman. She was beautiful in an ethereal way, her skin pale as starlight, her dark hair flowing like liquid shadow. But there was something else, a presence that made the air around her shimmer with barely contained energy. "The procedure failed," Captain Voss continued. "Or rather, it succeeded too well. She absorbed the entire collective consciousness of a Dominion battle fleet. 12,000 alien minds, all at once." Nixara's eyes opened, meeting Vex's gaze. Her lips moved, but no sound emerged. Instead, he felt her thoughts brush against his mind, not invasive like the Dominion interface, but gentle, questioning. "Who are you?" her mental voice whispered. "She hasn't spoken aloud since the incident," Captain Voss explained. "The trauma of absorbing so many minds at once damaged her vocal cords. But she communicates telepathically with those she trusts." Vex felt something shift inside him, a recognition that went deeper than words. Here was someone who understood the weight of unwanted knowledge, the burden of memories that weren't your own. "I'm the monster who killed your people," he thought, not sure if she could hear him. Her response was immediate and surprising, not anger or fear, but compassion. "We are all monsters here," Nixara's mental voice replied. "The question is whether we choose to remain monsters or become something more." Nixara became Vex's anchor in the weeks that followed. While the rest of the crew treated him with wary respect, she saw him without judgment. They would sit together in her soundproofed chamber, communicating in whispers and shared thoughts, finding solace in their mutual understanding of loss. She showed him fragments of what she'd absorbed, alien memories of conquest and subjugation, but also glimpses of the Dominion's true nature. They weren't conquerors by choice, but refugees from something far worse. Their collective consciousness was a defense mechanism, a way to survive the psychological trauma of their species, near-extinction. "Show me," Vex asked one day, and Nyx opened her mind to him completely. The vision hit him like a physical blow. He saw the Dominion homeworld, a paradise of crystal spires and floating gardens, consumed by shadow. Creatures of pure darkness that fed on individual consciousness, leaving only empty husks behind. The survivors had linked their minds together, sacrificing individuality for survival. "They're afraid," Nyxara whispered in his mind. "Everything they do comes from fear. The neural interfaces, the collective consciousness, sits all to prevent anyone from being alone with their thoughts, alone with the darkness." The Devourers, Vex breathed, the names surfacing from the absorbed memories. "That's what they're running from." Nyxara nodded, her face pale with remembered terror. "And now the Devourers have found this galaxy. The Dominion's invasion was just the first wave. They're preparing this space for something much worse. The revelation changed everything." Vex brought the intelligence to Captain Voss and her senior staff, but the reaction was skeptical. How could they trust information from a compromised source? How could they know it wasn't Dominion propaganda? Even if it's true, Commander Rausk argued, his scarred face twisted with suspicion. What difference does it make? The Dominion still needs to be stopped. But Vex had seen the fear in the alien memories. The Dominion wasn't evil, they were desperate. And if the Devourers were coming, humanity would need allies, not vengeance. The debate raged for days, dividing the crew. Some, led by Commander Rask, wanted to continue the guerrilla war against the Dominion. Others began to see the logic in Vex's proposal for negotiation. The ship became a powder keg of conflicting ideologies. It was Nyxara who provided the solution, though not in the way anyone expected. Vex found her in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. Her usual composure was gone, replaced by visible agitation. Her hands trembled as she gripped the railing. "What's wrong?" he asked, moving to stand beside her. She turned to him, and for the first time since they'd met, she spoke aloud. Her voice was barely a whisper, damaged by neural trauma, but still achingly beautiful. "They're coming," she said. "The Devourers. I can feel them at the edge of space." Vex felt ice in his veins. "How long do we have?" "Months, maybe less." Tears streamed down her face. "All those minds I absorbed, they're screaming. They know what's coming." He pulled her into his arms, feeling her body shake with suppressed sobs. In that moment, he realized that his feelings for her had evolved beyond mere understanding. She wasn't just someone who shared his burdens, she was the light that kept him from drowning in darkness. "We'll find a way," he promised. "We'll stop them." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes bright with desperate hope. "There is a way, but it requires sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice." Before he could ask what she meant, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Captain Voss's voice echoed through the corridors. "All hands, to battle stations. Dominion fleet approaching. This is not a drill." Through the observation deck's transparent aluminum windows, Vex saw the sleek, predatory shapes of Dominion warships dropping out of hyperspace. At least 40 vessels, more than enough to destroy the Defiant Dawn. But as he watched, something else emerged from the void, massive forms that seemed to absorb light itself. The Devourers had arrived ahead of schedule, and they were hungry. The first screams began moments later, as the shadow creatures reached out across space with tendrils of pure darkness, seeking minds to consume. The Dominion ships scattered in panic, their collective consciousness fragmenting under the psychic assault. Now, Nyxara whispered, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. Now we save them all. The battle was unlike anything in recorded history. The Devourers moved through space like living darkness, their forms defying physics as they phased between dimensions. Where they touched, reality itself seemed to wither. Dominion ships that had terrorized human space for years now fled in mindless panic, their neural networks overloading as the shadow creatures fed. The defiant dawn shuddered as psychic waves washed over the ship. Throughout the corridors, crew members collapsed as their minds were touched by alien hunger. Only those in the most heavily shielded sections remained conscious. Vex helped Nyxara to the ship's primary command center, where Captain Voss was desperately trying to coordinate a retreat. The tactical display showed the hopeless situation. 3 Devourers had emerged from hyperspace, each one the size of a small moon. The combined human and Dominion fleets were like insects before a hurricane. "We need to jump to hyperspace," Commander Rask shouted over the chaos. Now, before his words were cut off as one of the creatures turned its attention to the human ship. The lights dimmed as something vast and terrible pressed against the hull, seeking entry. Shields failing, Dr. Voss reported from the engineering station. Hull integrity at 60% and falling. Nyxara stepped forward, her face serene despite the chaos around her. "Captain, I need you to open a channel to the Dominion fleet." "Are you insane?" Rask snarled. "They'll use it to track us." "They're already tracking us," Nyxara replied calmly. "The Devourers can sense any conscious mind within light years. Running is pointless." Captain Voss hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Open the channel." The main display flickered to life, showing the bridge of a Dominion command ship. Admiral Threx appeared, his usually composed demeanor shattered by terror. Behind him, Vex could see crew members convulsing as their minds were torn apart. "Human vessel," Threx gasped, his voice distorted by static. "You must help us. The Devourers there, consuming everything. Our collective consciousness is failing." Vex stepped into view of the camera. "Admiral, we need to work together. Pool our resources." "You," Threx's compound eyes widened with recognition. "Kalen, you were supposed to be destroyed." The neural interface was removed, Vex finished. "But I retained the knowledge. I know what the Devourers are, and I know how to stop them." It was a lie, but a necessary one. The truth was that none of them knew how to fight creatures that existed partially outside normal spacetime. But Nyxara had a plan, and it required the cooperation of both fleets. "The Devourers feed on individual consciousness," Nyxara explained, her telepathic voice now broadcasting to both ships simultaneously. "But they can be overwhelmed by a sufficiently large and unified group mind." The Dominion's collective consciousness was the right idea, but too small in scope. Understanding dawned on Admiral Threx's face. "You're suggesting a temporary merger. Human and Dominion minds linked together." "Not just linked," Nyxara continued. "Unified. One consciousness spanning both species, strong enough to push back against The idea was terrifying. Voluntary neural interface, sharing thoughts and memories with the enemy. But as another Devourer struck the ship, sending crew members screaming into unconsciousness, alternatives became academic. "How do we do it, Captain?" Voss asked. Nyxara looked at Vex, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Through me, I already contain fragments of both human and Dominion consciousness. I can serve as the bridge." "No," Vex said immediately, understanding the implications. "The neural load would kill you." "Not kill," she whispered aloud, her damaged voice barely audible. "Transform. I would become the link permanently, neither human nor Dominion, but something new." The ship shook again as the Devourer pressed closer. Through the hull, Vex could hear a sound like reality, tearing the creature trying to phase into their dimension. "We're out of time," Captain Voss said urgently. If we're going to do this, it has to be now. Vex looked at Nyxera, seeing the resolve in her eyes. She had already made her choice. What do you need? Neural interface contact from both fleets. Every conscious mind linked through me. She moved to the ship's central command chair, her hands already reaching for the interface ports. And someone to anchor me. Someone whose mind I trust completely. She looked directly at him, and Vex understood. He would be her lifeline, the one constant in the storm of merged consciousness. If she was going to sacrifice her individuality for the greater good, he would be there with her. I'll do it, he said, without hesitation. Admiral Threx was already giving orders to his fleet, overriding the objections of his subordinates. The Dominion ships began broadcasting neural interface frequencies, their collective consciousness reaching out desperately for any refuge from the Devourers. Vex took his place at the secondary interface station, feeling the familiar burn of neural connections activating. But this time, instead of alien thoughts forcing their way into his mind, he felt Nyxera's presence guiding him. Are you ready? She asked telepathically. He looked at her one last time, memorizing her face before the transformation began. I'm ready. The convergence began with a whisper and became a roar. The joining was agony and ecstasy combined. Vex felt his consciousness expand beyond the confines of his individual mind, touching first Nyxera's thoughts, then spreading outward like ripples on a cosmic pond. Human memories merged with Dominion experiences, creating something that had never existed before, truly unified awareness. Through the link, he experienced the terror of Dominion soldiers as their homeworld burned. He felt the desperate love of human parents shielding their children from orbital bombardment. Pain and loss, hope and determination, all of it flowing together into a singular purpose. At the center of it all was Nyxera, her consciousness serving as the focal point for thousands of minds. Vex could feel her struggling to maintain her individual identity as the neural load threatened to wash her away completely. Hold on. He projected to her across the link. I'm here. Her response came as warmth and gratitude, but he could sense her fading. The process was consuming her, transforming her into something beyond human or Dominion, a living bridge between species. Carrying the weight of two civilizations' hopes, the Devourers recoiled as the unified consciousness struck them like a hammer blow. For the first time in eons, they encountered a group mind that was not fragmented by fear or division. The shadow creatures writhed in confusion as their usual feeding patterns were disrupted. Now, Nyxera's voice echoed through the collective consciousness, while they're disoriented. Push them back to their own dimension. The battle was fought not with weapons, but with will. 10,000 human and Dominion minds, working in perfect harmony, projecting a barrier of pure determination around the shadow creatures. The Devourers struck back with tendrils of entropy, trying to break the unity by amplifying individual fears and doubts. But the link held. Vex felt Admiral Threx's memories of his own children, lost in the first Devourer attack on the Dominion homeworld. He experienced Captain Voss's determination to protect the last remnants of humanity. Each mind in the network became a star in a constellation of shared purpose. The Devourers began to retreat, their forms becoming less substantial, as they were forced back toward the dimensional barriers. But one creature remained, larger and more ancient than the others. It had been feeding on conscious minds for millennia, and it would not be denied. The entity pressed forward, its hunger so vast that it began to crack the unified consciousness. Vex felt individual minds starting to fragment as the creature's influence spread through the network. It's too strong. Admiral Threx's thoughts echoed across the link. We can't hold against it. That was when Nyxera made her final sacrifice. Instead of maintaining her position as a bridge between the species, she stepped forward into the path of the ancient Devourer. Her consciousness expanded beyond all limits, becoming a beacon of pure light in the darkness. Nyxera? No. Vex screamed across the neural link. but it was too late. She absorbed the Devourer's attack, taking its hunger and malevolence into herself. The creature's essence merged with hers, but instead of being consumed, she transformed it. Millennia of accumulated darkness became something else: understanding, compassion, the wisdom that comes from experiencing ultimate loss. The ancient Devourer shrieked as it found itself changed, its hunger replaced by empathy. For the first time in its existence, it experienced the pain it had caused, felt the love that connected conscious beings across the galaxy. The transformation spread to the other Devourers, Nyxora's influence rippling through their dimensional space. One by one, the shadow creatures stopped their assault, their forms shifting from hungry darkness to something more complex: sadness, perhaps, or the ghost of long-forgotten compassion. The battle was over, but the cost was staggering. As the unified consciousness began to fragment back into individual minds, Vex desperately searched for Nyxora's presence. He found her at the edge of perception, her consciousness so expanded that she barely registered as human anymore. She had become something new, not quite alive, not quite digital, but eternal. "Nyxora," he called across the fading link. Her response came as a gentle touch against his mind, warm and familiar, despite the vast distances of space and consciousness that now separated them. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm everywhere. In every mind that touched the link, in every act of compassion between species. You gave me silence, Vex. Now I give you something greater than knowledge that love transcends." The boundaries of flesh and thought, the neural interfaces, shut down one by one as the emergency passed. The Devourers had withdrawn to their own dimension, no longer the hungry shadows they had been. The Dominion and human fleets floated in space, their crews slowly coming to terms with what had happened. Vex found himself back in his own mind, alone but not empty. He carried fragments of the link with him, memories of alien sunrises, the taste of hope in a dozen different languages, the feeling of belonging to something greater than himself. Captain Voss approached him as he disconnected from the interface. "Is it over?" "This part is," Vex replied, looking out at the stars where the Devourers had been. "But the real work is just beginning." 3 months after the convergence, Vex stood on the observation deck of the newly christened Unity Station, a joint human-Dominion facility orbiting the former battleground. Through the transparent aluminum, he could see ships from both species, working together, their crews slowly learning to trust each other. The transformation hadn't been easy. Centuries of conflict couldn't be erased overnight, and there were still those on both sides who preferred the old hatreds to the new hope. But the shared experience of the convergence had created bonds that transcended species barriers. Admiral Threx had become an unlikely ally, his own transformation perhaps the most dramatic of all. The alien who had once orchestrated humanity's near extinction now worked tirelessly to repair the damage, his understanding of loss having been amplified by contact with human grief. Commander Kalen, a young technician, approached, her voice nervous. She was one of the new generation humans and Dominion offspring who had volunteered for experimental neural compatibility treatments. "What is it, Zara?" Vex asked, recognizing the girl despite her mixed heritage. Her human features were softened by the subtle translucent quality of Dominion genetics. "We're receiving a transmission. Source unknown, but the signature. It matches the theoretical projections for dimensional communication." Vex felt his heart skip. For months, there had been theories that Nyxora might still exist in some form. Her consciousness spread across the dimensional barriers that separated normal space from the Devourer's realm. But this was the first potential evidence. He followed Zara to the communication center, where a team of scientists from both species were working frantically to decode the signal. The transmission was unlike anything they'd encountered, not electromagnetic radiation or quantum entanglement, but something that seemed to exist in the spaces between thoughts. "Can you isolate it?" Vex asked Dr. Meridian, the station's chief communications officer. Working on it, the Dominion scientist replied, her forearms dancing across multiple control surfaces. The signal is incredibly complex. It's not just data, it's carrying emotional resonance, memory fragments, even sensory impressions. The main display flickered to life, showing a cascade of symbols and patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living things. At first, it appeared to be random noise, but gradually, Vex began to see structure in the chaos. It was language, not human or Dominion, but something new, a form of communication that conveyed not just information, but the full spectrum of conscious experience. I need the neural interface, Vex said suddenly. Sir, that's not advisable, Dr. Meridian warned. We don't know what this signal might do to an unprepared mind. I'm not unprepared, Vex replied, already moving toward the interface chair. I was part of the convergence. If anyone can decode this, it's me. The neural connection activated with familiar warmth, but this time, instead of the invasive presence of alien thoughts, Vex felt something like coming home. The signal resolved into coherent communication, and suddenly he knew beyond any doubt that Nixera was trying to reach him. Vex. Her voice came not as sound but as pure meaning, carrying with it the essence of everything she had become. Can you hear me? I hear you, he replied, tears streaming down his face. Where are you? Everywhere. Nowhere. I exist in the spaces between dimensions now, watching over the barriers that keep the devourers contained. Her presence was vast and warm, like being embraced by starlight. But I wanted you to know, the silence you gave me wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. Through the link, she showed him visions of the future human and Dominion colonies working together, their children playing under alien suns. The devourers, transformed by her sacrifice, learning to create instead of consume. A galaxy healing from centuries of war and fear. Is this real? Vex asked. Or just hope? Both, Nixara replied. The future is what we make it. And we made something beautiful. The transmission began to fade as the dimensional barriers reasserted themselves. But before the connection was lost completely, Nixera sent him one final gift, not memories or visions, but a feeling. The knowledge that love, once given freely, echoes across time and space, creating connections that no force in the universe can break. Wait, Vex called out desperately. Will I see you again? Her answer came as a whisper of wind across his consciousness, carrying the scent of flowers that bloomed in dimensions beyond counting, in every act of compassion, in every bridge built between strangers, in every moment when someone chooses understanding over fear. Her presence was fading, but her warmth remained. I am the silence between words that carries meaning. And you, Vex Kalen, are the one who taught me that silence can be full of love. The connection ended, leaving Vex alone in the chair with tears on his face and a smile in his heart. Around him, the communication center erupted in excited discussion as the scientists tried to understand what had happened. But Vex already understood. Nixora hadn't been lost in the convergence, she had been transformed into something greater, a guardian at the threshold between dimensions, a bridge between what was and what could be. He looked out through the station's windows at the ships, passing by human and Dominion crews working side by side, their children learning to play together in the station's gardens. The future Nixora had shown him was already beginning. The war was over. The darkness had been transformed into light, and in the silence between the stars, love echoed eternal. Commander Vex Kalen had lost his soul to the Dominion's neural interface, had found it again in Nixera's compassionate silence, and had discovered that some things, the most important things, transcend the boundaries of flesh and thought. In the end, he had learned that the greatest victories aren't won with weapons, but with the courage to trust, to love, and to believe that even the darkest silence can be pregnant with hope. The universe is vast and full of wonders, he thought, feeling Nyxora's presence like a gentle touch across his mind. And the greatest wonder of all is that we don't have to face it alone. Outside, the stars sang their ancient song, and in the silence between the notes, love found its voice.